Hello and welcome to season 12, episode 7 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop. It seems like you have a cold.
No, I don't have a cold. I'm just tired. I'm
You're just
studying for
very,
exams.
you seem slow. You're dim-witted.
I apologize. That's
I
not
think I'm coming
nice.
out with a cold.
Maybe you gave it to
So,
me right before I left.
oh, it could be. Or you gave it to me right before you left.
That's also possible.
But I don't know yet.
Hmm.
It's like you kind of feel a little funky, but
Yeah.
not quite.
I was feeling some of that a little bit yesterday.
Hmm.
So
I'll
who
blame your
knows?
mother. Your mother probably got us both sick.
That's probably right. We are, of
Yes.
course, reading Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind, this time talking about the chapter Two Revolutions in Two States of Nature, so sort of comparing the American Revolution a little bit with the French Revolution, but more so sort of the schools of thought behind those rather than the revolutions themselves, is kind of the angle
Right.
that he was getting at here.
Yes. And I was a little surprised that this is a standalone chapter.
Mm,
This is the most philosophical, I
hmm
think, of what we've read, so far. I'm going to adjust my microphone. Hold on. All right. But it didn't really have a whole lot to do yet with education. I assume in
Right.
some chapters he's going to link it all up. But it was an excellent summary of
hmm
the differing philosophies of the French Revolution and the American Revolution.
Right.
And
Ex-
but he didn't make any point to. Well, I mean, he talked about the development of a more American philosophy about the
right.
the middle class, as we like to
However
call
you want to pronounce it, I think is
it.
fine.
Yeah, I don't like those French words.
I know.
um, he talked about that and how it affected, politics generally, but it's not, really go into this
Right.
core subject yet of education and the youth and all that kind of stuff. But you can kind of
Right.
see laying the framework for it.
Yeah. Sometimes I forget, reading this book that it is supposed to be like principally about education because he just brings in so much, different stuff
Yes.
from all sorts of directions that he eventually brings it back to education. But a lot of different topics sort of piled in one or connected to that for sure. But I like
Well,
how
education is a kind of a big subject.
that is
It's
true.
like
It's
kind of like the study of knowledge.
that is
What is
true.
that? What is that? Epistemology?
Epistemology, yeah.
Yes.
That is true. I like how he starts there. He says, this difference between the continental depth. You have this notion that all of the European philosophers are really studying deeper topics. Continental depth was thought by intellectuals to be opposed to American superficiality. American souls were, so to speak, constructed without abasement, more reconciled to this world and not addicted to looking beyond it, not haunted by a sense of the groundlessness of their experience. Thus, when Americans became able to afford the luxury of indulging in continental literature as in continental cuisine, we had to wonder whether their appetite was real and how they would digest the fare. So there's this treatment sort of Americans that there's not as strong of like an intellectual history, which he even seems to kind of accept, in previous chapters where he's talking about, when the French are going through their education system, they learn a lot more about the sort of
Yeah.
continental philosophers, but Americans get to sort of pick and choose, and you don't go as deep into one particular group of people or one particular school of thought.
Yes.
I guess you have nothing to add.
No, I do. I mean, I think I'm surprised he didn't focus more on religion
Mm-hmm.
because the French Revolution was obviously hostile to religion and really in particular the Catholic Church because it
Mm-hmm.
was so tied up with the monarchy. I think to their great detriment, even creating the goddess of reason
Right.
when it came to their ultimate absurdities of that revolution. But I think that's part of the reason why, um, he describes it as a deepness or really probing the depths of the soul and
Mm-hmm.
evil and all that. But I think a lot of that has to do with a lack of religion.
Mm-hmm.
When the United States was formed, I mean, I think even Tocqueville, if I remember correctly, talked a lot about local churches and
Right.
really, that was the foundational um, structure of society is
Mm-hmm.
families, but also churches. And he doesn't really mention that too much. And I think that's one of the fundamental differences between
Mm.
the two revolutions. I mean, one is emphasis on equality, liberty,
Hmm.
equality. What's the third one? Egalitarian,
Fraternity of the French.
fraternity.
Yeah.
Yeah. What the hell is fraternity? I mean, it's ridiculous. So, like they purported to have and he doesn't mention this, like that. I don't think he mentions it, or if he does, it didn't really emphasize it. Well, he did mention that the United States has negative rights,
Mm-hmm.
free from governmental intrusion, other than the government is to protect the individual rights. And the French Revolution, their philosophy was to try to have affirmative rights where the government's going to provide, and that's a
Hmm.
completely different philosophy. And he talks, and he does talk extensively about like the state of nature, the different
Right.
theories, the two different theories about, well, what is the actual state of nature, and he describes, the continental view of Americans that were superficial
Hmm. Right, because
and
that's
everything
what
that
he
goes with that
says.
on. Yeah,
After this introduction, he says like the main issue is the word bourgeois, which he says originally meant when these continental philosophers were talking about it was a diminished, egotistical, materialistic being without grandeur or beauty of soul, and has maintained that negative sense up to our day. And he says this long line of continental thinking that's like this is what needs to be overcome. This is what sort of modern democracy has produced. But he says that some Americans don't really view it that way. He says, the Americans feel that the modern democratic project is being fulfilled in their country, can be
yes,
fulfilled elsewhere, and that the project is good. They do not naturally apply the term bourgeois to themselves or to anyone else for that matter. They do like to call themselves middle class, but that does not carry with it any determinate spiritual content. It is rather a good thing to be. And so
yeah,
he's like, well, it's taken as a negative when you're looking at, sort of these revolutions are emerging, as the continent's looking over at, either France or America or whatever. Like, this is the end product. It's going to be bad. You're not going to have any spiritual depth or anything. Whereas Americans have kept the sense, still up to this day, that being that sort of middle class person is not a bad thing at all, actually, and can be achieved and should be achieved by more people.
yeah. And it's not like he says, it's not a term of judgment
Right.
or moral worth. It's a description of where you fit in the economic structure.
Mm-hmm.
You're not poor, you're not wealthy, you're in middle class. And that's really the sweet spot for a republic,
Mm-hmm.
a democratic republic, is you have to have a certain majority.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think you should have a plurality. You have to have a majority in that middle class, in order to have a functioning,
Right.
democracy or republic. Because you have too many poor people, they're just going to vote for more government payments to them. You
Mm-hmm.
have too many rich people, or they have too much power, um, then then everybody else gets a shaft.
Right. I like what he says too, on 158, where he says, that the American Revolution was this view that once it had happened, it had kind of achieved what we needed to achieve, right? We'd sort of
Yes.
instituted the good polity, the good government, and we don't need to have continual revolutions. We don't need to keep, upheaving, the principles of legitimacy, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. But he says, kind of comparing that to the French Revolution was not the same thing in the slightest. And that's when you start to see we need the continual revolution. And you do have that in some of the early American thinkers calling for, continual revolutions, but not nearly as much as the French.
Well,
He
you,
also
you
makes
had
the
you had those really only in Jefferson and his
right,
supporters, because
right,
they were big supporters of the French
right,
Revolution.
right.
Stupidly so, and way too long. I mean,
Hmm.
it was known that they were murdering people
Right.
without trial, and Jefferson still persisted in praising them. And
Hmm.
so the um, Adams and his crew were 100% right on that issue, and the British were gassed.
Hmm.
That all their buddies in the aristocracy were getting imprisoned and murdered, and
Right,
yeah, it's pretty amazing.
right.
And it really is, the devaluing of life, and the lack of religion, and the belief that, essentially human life is not sacrosanct. There's
Hmm.
no, that's why I think it's kind of I think it's interesting that he doesn't mention all that. And
Hmm.
that's the big difference, is that really is essentially the desecration of man,
Yeah.
that we're not sacred individuals, according to the French Revolution and communism,
Hmm.
which is, they're like the twin-headed beast.
Yeah.
The Robespierre type Rousseauians,
Hmm.
and the communists. I mean, there's really not a lot of difference between the two of them. They're just kind of like part of that same spectrum.
Right.
And he doesn't really emphasize that. He talks about the philosophy difference between Locke and Rousseau. Okay,
Hmm.
great, but contract theory doesn't explain everything
Right.
as far as like the people and all that. But in all of that, like you mentioned like what was it? I think it was Jefferson's mentioned like we should have a revolution or
Yeah,
pay for
basically like
blood
every
every
20
20
years.
years,
Yeah.
and that's been repudiated. I mean,
Right.
throughout American history, it was there was not 20 years later some sort of uprising. I mean, there's been civil strife or whatever. Of course, the Great Civil War,
Hmm.
1860s, but that's there's a big period of time between the two, and I think a lot of that had to do with the rejection of Jefferson's
Right.
example. And today, that if you talk, I mean, people, the fringe or silly people that aren't serious talk about revolution,
Hmm.
but I think the vast majority of Americans know that um, that just leads to misery and death.
Right. I like how he characterizes things too, because he says, that the French Revolution was, much more of a much bigger deal in Europe than, of course, the American
Yes,
Revolution was. France
right.
was one of the centers of all of European life, and he says, really for the next several hundred years, all of European politics are sort of a reaction to the French Revolution.
Yes,
Because he says you have, the people on the right who wanted to undo the revolution in the name of throne and altar, and this reaction probably breathed its last only with Francisco Franco in 1975. Another form of the right, as it were, progressive right, wanted to create and impose a new kind of inequality, a new European or German aristocracy on the world, and it was blasted out of existence in Berlin in 1945. The left, which intended to complete the revolution by abolishing private property, is still quite alive, but has never succeeded in doing so in those nations, particularly France, most influenced by the French Revolution. It was the center, the bourgeois solution, which in the long run won out, but after so many regrets and so many disappointed aspirations, and he continues on from there. He's like, everything's really a reaction to these revolutions, and principally the French Revolution.
I would agree with that conclusion, but I don't agree with his characterization of the fascists being of the right.
Hmm.
I've always had a problem with that. They're a product of the left
Hmm.
because they're democratic socialists. They want government control over the means of production. It's a corporate
Right.
communism, which we're at risk of currently. And also, so I disagree with that, and I also don't think that the religiously inspired government died with Franco. I think
Mm.
that's alive and well,
Yeah.
and it may have died around the era of Reagan because you never hear
Hmm.
anybody talking about. Well, I mean, Trump does talk about God, but in a
Hmm.
non really ecclesiastical or a non denominational way. Of course, Reagan wasn't, talking about Catholicism or any
Right.
particular religion
Right.
either, but he was certainly talking about Christianity.
Hmm.
But I don't know that it's dead. I think it's in its doldrums.
Yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
can
if
certainly stand
anything, I
by
think
that.
it's emerging once again. I mean, I'm seeing
Yeah.
more and more people more openly talk about religious principles and politics and things like that.
Yes.
And I think that's something that's going to be a major factor, going forward.
Yeah. The key to that is when you see the Knights of Columbus becoming an armed wing, and then you know it started.
Yeah.
It's not just a bunch of old guys in funny hats and
Hmm.
fake swords.
I like what he says, or well, I kind of disagree actually. Moving on to 160, kind of on this topic, because he says Americans found little to charm them in the ancient regime of France. Its throne and altar were the very reality of, respectively, the unjust inequality and the prejudice that the American regime was intended to replace in the world. America, they believed, would succeed in its project with relative ease because we began here with the equality of conditions. And,
Mhm.
and I think he's not necessarily right about that because I think it's going back to your point about the religion.
Yeah.
Because like I don't think all Americans are inherently opposed to throne and altar and having these sort of very strong religious principles in government because all of the early Americans for the most part supported that. And I think it's only sort of a modern look at American history that you see that sort of cropping up, saying, well, America had no religious principles really firmly or anything like that. So I kind of disagree with him there.
Well, I guess I don't. You might be overstating his point
Yeah.
because the founding fathers, while Christian, were generally non-denominational, and they talked about God, but they were not talking about. They were talking about natural law, which which is a Christian, theory of law that certain rights exist prior to the government even existing,
Hmm.
that are just common and inherent in the individual. But I don't know that he's saying as much as what
Yeah.
you might be saying. Although I kind of argued the opposite of what I just said because I think he misses I think it's more of a societal difference.
Right.
I don't think I would hope that, well, I don't think at the time, like in the 1700s, that the American people would have, no matter who was in charge, gone down the path of the guillotine like the French did.
Mm.
Um, but I think that the church had been so corrupted um, with its entanglements with the French aristocracy that sort of moral categorical thinking
Right.
um, did not have a vast public support. But
Hmm.
you know whether it could happen now, probably more likely, depending on who's getting the guillotine. Um, I don't know, but
Yeah. I don't know,
uh,
because I think he places a really big emphasis like on the Americans were always very anti-aristocracy, very
true.
anti-monarchy and
Yeah.
things like that, which I don't know if is necessarily true.
Oh,
Because I mean,
well, I don't know. Yeah.
you had like established state churches. And I think the way our government's set up is that you have all of the good elements of aristocracy and monarchy, right? Because when you have the Senate, which is essentially an aristocratic body, you have the executive, which had more power than a lot of kings like actually did, in a lot of the countries over there. And I mean, all of the representatives, all of the senators were like a landed gentry class.
Yeah, and only people who owned land could vote.
Right. And so I don't
So,
think it's an inherently like anti-aristocratic, people
yeah,
that you had. I don't think that was the driving influence. And he seems like that's kind of what he's saying. Or at least
that's
that's
true.
the
That's
perspective of
true.
a lot of these philosophers on America.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, I concede that point.
Good. Thank you.
No, it's good. Yeah, that's yeah. And then of course it begs the question: was that better than what we have now?
Yeah.
But um, I think the biggest negative change in our country, it was constitutional change, was direct election of senators. I've
Mm,
mentioned
yeah.
before, and now it's a different kind of corrupt aristocracy
Yeah.
where it's like these guys don't have any talent. I don't know if they have. I mean, I don't know if they've earned any money. A lot of them inherited. You know,
Yeah.
well, Pritzker's not in the Senate. He's going to be running for
Yeah.
president, but
Yeah,
he's here in
probably.
Illinois, and he's a billionaire because he inherited the wealth from I think it was the Hilton hotel chain, maybe.
Right.
And all these guys. Well, John Kerry married into wealth. Or he's not a senator anymore,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
John McCain married a wealthy woman.
Mm,
He's
did it
dead.
really? Mm.
Oh yeah, yeah. His wife was
Well, I did not
because
know that.
he divorced. He came back from Vietnam and divorced his wife.
Oh, wow.
Um, which I mean, things change when you're in a prison camp for 7 years. But
I guess that's true.
um, anywho,
Yeah. Interesting.
well, yeah. So I think legislatures picking them, but that's a whole different
Hmm.
subject.
Yeah.
But yeah, you make a good point that, and there was a big group that wanted to make George Washington king, and he
Yeah.
refused.
Yeah.
There were monarchists. They
Yeah.
wanted to set up their own monarchy.
Because I think, at least especially when America was originally sort of constructed, I think you can make a really good argument that it's was more of like the mixed regime that like Aquinas talk about and
Mhm.
Aristotle talks about. It's not necessarily like a purely democratic republic, especially as it was originally set up, where you didn't
True.
have the direct election of senators and you had sort of I think in some ways like the executive had more power, and in some ways. It has more power now with all of the three-letter agencies. It's become a different sort of corporate power than what
Yes.
it was, back in the day. But I think there's a very good argument you can make there about the
Yeah.
structure of the U.S. But
Agreed.
thank
Good
you.
point.
But yeah, then he talks about, then he goes into the differences between Locke and Rousseau. He says this is really, what you see as the American and French revolutions are playing out the thought of these two figures. And he goes down that way for quite some time. That's really what
Yeah.
he's talking about with these two distinct states of nature. where what is society's purpose? Is there a state of nature? Which I'm kind of convinced that talking about the state of nature is kind of a pointless thing to do, especially after reading the Restis Bronson book.
Yeah.
Completely put me off that idea entirely. But I mean, he does say Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau all found that one way or another nature led men to war, and that civil society's purpose was not to cooperate with a natural tendency in man toward perfection, but to make peace where nature's imperfection causes war. And so that's what they really see the purpose of society being, is how do you keep all of these competing influences like incapable of really hurting each other? How do you provide security? How do you make sure that it's not just a constant state of war? That's sort of the driving influence behind all of these guys.
Yes.
Yes. I guess you
So
don't have any
no,
further
I
thoughts
don't. I
on
mean,
that.
it's a good summary of
Hmm.
this chapter, and like I said, I think he's going to get to his point and bring it back to the present
Hmm.
time. I did like he the very last page. I thought had
Hmm.
a couple different, three different excerpts from that. I don't know if you're ready to go there or not, but
Sure.
do you want to go back? But like towards the top of 172, he says, "Now there are two competing views about man's relation to nature, both founded on the modern distinction between nature and society. Nature is a raw material of man's freedom from harsh necessity, or else man is a polluter of nature. Nature in both cases means dead nature or nature without man and untouched by man, mountains, forests, lakes, and rivers." And he
Hmm.
talks about that kind of like environmental, like, almost worship of nature as opposed to, well, it's a resource and we're going to conserve it, that type of thing. He doesn't really make that argument, flesh it out that much.
Right.
And he's talking about, like, the nature of man. Like, are we stewards or are we poison,
Hmm.
to the, and I think that does play out in the two schools of thought about the future of American
Yeah.
and what is justice.
Yeah. He makes another, I mean, on that point, actually, he makes a good point, a little bit earlier on where he's talking about, I won't be able to find the exact page, but he says, really, when you start talking about, nature and rights and things like that, you've started to see this decline of talking about justice, like in
Yeah,
itself, right? Now, sort of justice is boiled down to, well, how do we keep, security, from the state of nature? How do we build up a system where people aren't killing each other? And then from that, how do we just protect people's rights? And
yes,
so it's like this again kind of like negative conception of, well, how do we just not infringe on them? And you've lost this sort of like classical or medieval conception of, well, maybe the state is oriented towards justice, oriented towards the common good, where there's more of a purpose of things rather than just how do we keep people from killing each other, and
right.
how do we keep ourselves from us, the government, from putting the people down and infringing on their rights. It says you've kind of seen this inversion of what people thought like the purpose of the state is over time following these revolutions. I think that's a very important point, and a very good point that he makes there.
Yes, good job.
You saying that to
Um,
me or to him?
to your is your summary
Oh,
of
thank you,
his. Yeah, yeah,
thank
yeah.
you, thank you.
So I like the last couple sentences of
Hmm.
the chapter. Now you can go back because I know you always like to go back when I skip ahead. It says the two outstanding intellectual types of our day represent those two teachings. The crisp, positive, efficient, no nonsense, nonsense economist is the Lockean. The deep, brooding, somber psychoanalyst is the Rousseauian. In principle, their positions are incompatible, but easygoing America provides them with a modus vivendi. Economists tell us how to make money, psychiatrists give us a place to spend it.
Mm,
That was kind of funny.
yeah, I think that's great because I mean it is very true because I mean both of them are really not talking about the sort of justice, the common good, or things like that.
Yes.
It's these very sort of negative conceptions of just we're horrible and brutish at our core, and government just exists to stop us from killing each other. And I mean, yeah, I don't want to have a too like good of a view of what human nature is because we're always inclined to sin and things like that. But I think in the modern day we've lost a sense of what the state is really for,
Yes.
if it is for anything at all. And I think most
Yes.
people really don't think the state is for anything, in that it doesn't have like a purpose beyond a negative conception. It doesn't have a positive purpose.
Oh, I don't know about that.
You
Do you
know?
think that's the most people?
I don't know about most people. I think it's certainly a sizable portion.
I think the vast majority of people think the government should be a positive,
Mm,
um, play a positive role in society, an active positive role in society.
mm,
I think the left certainly believe it.
yeah.
They just wanted to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And I think a lot of people on the right believe it too, as an arm of justice and protecting individual rights and truth in science. And I'm overstating
Right.
the favorable view, but also that it's patriotic, that it's wrapped up in love of country and citizenship and all
Mm.
that stuff. So I think there's a sense of that. Now I think everybody agrees that our government has failed
Yeah.
in pursuing those goals from different perspectives.
Mm.
Like even on the immigration issue,
Yeah.
the left thinks it's horrible that they're deporting these poor innocent foreign citizens, and the right thinks you're not doing enough or fast enough or whatever. So
Yeah.
everybody's disappointed and critical of the government, but from opposite angles.
Yeah.
And there's very few people who are like,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
right. It's about right. They're doing about right.
I guess that's true.
Trump is
That,
trying to do the about right.
yeah.
Like, I'm not going to touch the farm workers. Okay.
Yeah. That reminds me. I was seeing some sort of study that was done like a month ago or so, or was looking at Gen Z and their approval ratings of Trump, and they were very low across both conservatives and liberals in this one particular study. And I saw a bunch of liberal people sharing this online, like, look, the idea that Gen Z is super conservative is dead. Look, they don't like what Trump is doing, on immigration or
Right.
the Epstein list or things like that. And you would see people responding like, that statistic does not mean what you think it means. It means
Right.
that these young people, these young conservatives, wish that he was doing more, not that he
Right.
was doing less. Not
Yes.
that they're unhappy with him because he's too conservative. They're unhappy with him because he's not conservative enough. He's not
Right.
achieving these things fast enough or to the numbers that people want. So I think that's very true.
Yes.
Yes. You seem tired today.
Well, I think it might be getting cold,
That is true.
but I also think, I mean, it was a good chapter,
Hmm.
very philosophical, and like I said, I think he's laying the foundation to make important points about current American society, but he made almost none in this chapter. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? I'm
Well, it
like,
seems
okay,
like
well, yeah,
just reading the first page of the next one titled "The Self," where the first sentence, the domain now supervised by psychiatrists as well as other specialists in the deeper understanding of man is the self. So I'm sure there'll be some good thoughts there, and to
yes,
go over psychoanalysis of what people are, sort of
yes.
for the modern day.
Yeah, I've kind of come to, I don't know, I'm of two minds, which would make sense with Freud and stuff. But I'm not a fan of how we currently treat people with mental illnesses, which is pump them full of different medications and
Right.
keep adjusting it until you try to get it right. And I think a lot of people are ill served for that with that. And then but then I I used to think, well, why don't they just go to a counselor, like the talk therapy, because it had been shown to be really effective. But I think the problem with that is there's too many therapists that are crazy. It's like, wait a second, that you can't do that. You have to have therapists that have the right philosophy, which
Right.
is if you apply yourself to a lot of problems,
Hmm.
like especially people who have anxiety, you can't feed into it
Right.
and encourage people essentially to be more anxious.
Hmm.
You have to figure out a way through it.
Right.
Uh, and so now I don't know what to do with people that have mental
Yeah.
illness. I
I
mean,
think
I don't know
it,
what we're doing with
I think
people.
you're right because I mean I think it could be a good thing if you have the right people in the job. But you look at the
Yes,
people who are getting these psychology degrees, these psychiatry degrees, and they are like the craziest people you'll ever meet in your entire life. And it's like there's no
100%.
way that you could really be doing any good here, at a fundamental level. Because I mean, you look at these people, it's like, what do you even understand? Who the person is? And I think these are the exact topics he's going to talk about next time. Because you're
Yeah.
coming at it from, well, a person's just a series of chemical reactions in the
Yes.
brain, and you just
Right.
need to medicate that or, talk through that. And, the people aren't really real, what is the
Yeah.
self and things like that, which I'm guessing that's what we'll get into next time.
I think the only way a person can be an effective psychologist, psychiatrist, or counselor is if you're, quite frankly, that you're Christian, maybe
Yeah.
Jewish, but you believe in the inherent value of each individual,
Yeah.
100%. That every individual has that value from God, and then you know with work you can overcome a whole heck of a lot. Now,
Hmm.
if you have actual psychotic breaks, that's a whole different
Right.
discussion what I'm talking about here. I mean, if you cannot perceive reality, but you can still get treatment, but the treatment has to be emphasis on trying to ground yourself in the known world and
Right.
reality,
Right.
and to kind of encourage deviant behavior. And of course, using the word deviant would probably be
Right.
break some sort of ethical rule for
Hmm.
psychologists or psychiatrists.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
think,
because that's the big thing is you need some sort of good standard to compare to when
right,
you're treating people. It's like what is the good thing for a person to be, and even having that sort of standard, I think, is frowned upon. But by most psychologists, we can't say what is really right or wrong for any person. You know,
yeah,
there's nothing that's inherently good in any way. And it's like, well, that's just going to lead people down a very very bad
yeah,
path.
it's this modern therapeutic culture,
Yeah.
which is flows out of I think the Rusarian, thinking about how you can modify people's souls, you
Right.
know, like, well, no, like or like Descartes, I'm gonna think from the beginning. I'm gonna create a new philosophy.
Hmm.
Okay,
Good luck.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's almost all derivative of something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But any event,
Very
so
true.
I thought it was well read, well
Yeah.
written. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I was
No,
enjoyed
another.
reading it, and it's something that we've covered before,
Yeah.
you know, in previous podcasts, and the general philosophical and political differences between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And this is like, okay, yeah, this
Right.
could have been like introductory couple paragraphs into whatever his point's going to be.
Yeah. I kind of felt the same way, but I guess we'll have that next time.
Yes,
All right.
correct.
Well, do you have any other thoughts?
No, I'm all out.
All right. Well, you can, of course, follow us on
Do you
Twitter.
do you have do you have any other thoughts?
No, I have no other thoughts. I'm back in
Great.
Florida. I don't know if I mentioned that at the
We
top of
have
the
not.
episode,
Yeah, we're
but
doing
oh,
this
yes,
remote.
yes, back to remote episodes, unfortunately. But
Hey,
yeah.
who's the statue of the white
Oh,
figure
that's
on the wall?
the bust of David.
Which David?
Michelangelo's David.
Ah,
Yes.
that
Yeah, no,
David.
I rearranged my room for all the people who are
Yes.
watching the podcast right now.
How
My
did you
room is
rearrange it?
slightly
Yeah,
different.
yeah, because I'm at a
Yes,
different angle.
fantastic.
Usually
Yes,
you're angled uh,
yes,
90 degrees to
yes. Well,
your
I
right.
can give you the tour after we stop recording. This isn't going to be interesting to anybody who's just listening to the audio of me describing my room.
Well,
All
that's
right.
okay.
Well, this has been season
Nobody's
12.
listening anyway. What are
That
you
is
talking
true. That is true. This has been season
about? To
12,
my plan.
episode 7 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.